What if the person you treated as invisible was the only one who could save you? We've all seen someone look down on another, judging them by their job, their clothes, their station in life. But what happens when that judgment is catastrophically wrong? In today's story, we witness a single, brutal moment of arrogance in a high-end Manhattan restaurant. A moment where a millionaire's girlfriend tries to shatter a young waitress's dignity, but she has no idea who she's talking to. She doesn't know that the quiet woman serving her champagne is about to walk into her boyfriend's boardroom and decide the fate of his billion-dollar empire. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the power that lies hidden in plain sight. The air in Aurelia's, a Michelin-starred sanctuary on Park Avenue, was thick with the scent of white truffle and quiet money. Conversations were murmurs, laughter was a finely tuned instrument, and the clinking of Cristofal silverware against Bernardo porcelain was the restaurant's delicate heartbeat. Ilara Vance moved through it all like a ghost, her presence marked only by the seamless refilling of a water glass or the silent clearing of a plate. Her uniform, a simple tailored black dress, was her cloak of invisibility. For 2 years, she had mastered the art of being present but unseen, a silent cog in a machine of extravagant indulgence. Tonight, Table 12 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was occupied by Julian Sterling, the 32-year-old CEO of Sterling Vance Innovations, SVI, a tech giant on the cusp of launching a revolutionary green energy initiative codenamed the Helios Project. He had the sharp jawline and restless energy of a man who believed the world was his to conquer. Opposite him sat his girlfriend, Tiffany Carmichael, a woman sculpted by ambition and social media filters. Her red dress was a slash of defiance against the restaurant's muted tones, her laughter just a little too loud, her gestures a little too grand. Ilara had served them before. Julian was usually polite but distracted, his eyes constantly darting to his phone. Tiffany, however, treated the waitstaff as inconvenient furniture. "Another bottle of the Petru," Tiffany announced, waving a hand adorned with a diamond that caught the light and fractured it into a dozen tiny rainbows. She didn't look at Ilara, her gaze fixed on Julian. "We're celebrating after all. The board meeting tomorrow is just a formality, right, darling? They'll approve of Helios, and you'll be the king of the world." Julian offered a tight smile. "It's not that simple, Tiff. There are still a few old guard members who need convincing. Marcus Thorne, for one. He was a close friend of Arthur Vance." The name sent a familiar, bittersweet pang through Ilara's chest. Arthur Vance, her grandfather, the brilliant, reclusive co-founder of SVI, who had passed away a year ago, leaving her a legacy she was still struggling to comprehend. "Vance?" Tiffany scoffed, wrinkling her perfectly powdered nose. "The ghost in the machine? Honestly, Julian, the company has your name on it first for a reason. You're the one making it a powerhouse. He was just a nerdy engineer." Ilara's fingers tightened on her silver tray. Her grandfather had been more than a nerdy engineer. He was the visionary, the heart of the company. Julian's father had been the business mind, but Arthur Vance had been the soul. As Ilara leaned in to pour the last of the wine, her sleeve brushed against Tiffany's shoulder bag, a ridiculously expensive Hermes Birkin perched on the adjacent chair. Tiffany recoiled as if she'd been electrocuted. "Oh my God, watch it! Do you have any idea how much this costs? This is worth more than your entire year's salary, probably your entire life." The nearby tables fell silent. The restaurant's delicate heartbeat faltered. Ilara froze, her cheeks burning with a heat that had nothing to do with the bustling kitchen. She pulled back immediately. "My sincerest apologies, Ms. Carmichael." Tiffany wasn't finished. She picked up the bag, inspecting it for imaginary damage. "People like you just don't understand value. You drift through life with no ambition, no drive, serving people who are actually doing something with their lives. It must be so bleak." She looked directly at Ilara for the first time, her eyes cold and dismissive. "What's your name?" "Ilara," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Ilara," Tiffany repeated, tasting the name with theatrical disdain. "Well, Ilara, maybe if you spent less time being clumsy and more time aspiring to something, you wouldn't be in your mid-20s serving wine to your superiors. A word of advice: aim higher. Though looking at you, perhaps this is as high as you'll ever get. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Tiff, that's enough. What? It's the truth, she said, turning her dazzling smile back to him, the incident already forgotten. She needs to hear it. It's for her own good. Alara stood paralyzed for a moment, the insult hanging in the air like poison gas. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, some pitying, some scornful, some simply curious. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. Dignity, Ellie, is the one thing they can never take from you unless you give it away. She met Tiffany's gaze, her own expression unreadable. Will there be anything else, Miss Carmichael? The quiet defiance seemed to annoy Tiffany more than an outburst would have. No, just go. She waved her away with a flick of her wrist, as if dismissing a fly. Alara nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the kitchens, her posture erect, her steps measured. She didn't look at Julian, but she felt his gaze follow her, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Shame, perhaps, or a fleeting moment of recognition. As the kitchen doors swung shut behind her, the noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by the clang of pots and the shouts of chefs. Her friend and fellow waitress Maya rushed to her side. I can't believe she said that to you, Maya whispered, her face tight with anger. What a monster! Are you okay? Alara leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, closing her eyes. She wasn't just okay, she was focused. The humiliation was a fire, not burning her down, but forging something within her into hardened steel. For months, she had been an observer, honoring her grandfather's last wish to understand the company from the ground up, not the throne down. She had watched, listened, and learned. But Tiffany's cruel words had been more than an insult. They were a catalyst. The time for observation was over. I'm fine, Maya, Alara said, opening her eyes. They were clear and calm, but a storm was gathering in their depths. In fact, I've never been better. She untied her apron. I need to go home. I have a big day tomorrow. Alara's apartment was a world away from the gilded cage of Aurelia's. It was a modest one-bedroom in the East Village, a space defined not by wealth but by history. The walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves, crammed with everything from classic literature to dense engineering textbooks. The air smelled of old paper and brewing tea. It was a sanctuary of thought, a stark contrast to the performative opulence she served every night. She dropped her keys into a small ceramic bowl on a worn wooden table. On that same table sat a framed photograph, a smiling, kind-eyed man with a shock of white hair and a blueprint spread before him. Arthur Vance. Well, Grandpa, she whispered to the picture, I think my internship in the real world is officially over. She walked into her bedroom and opened the closet. Pushed to the back, behind her simple waitress uniforms and worn jeans, was a garment bag. She unzipped it, revealing a single, impeccably tailored, navy blue suit from Savile Row, a gift from her grandfather for her college graduation. She had never worn it. It felt like a costume for a life she wasn't yet living. Tomorrow it will be her armor. Her grandfather had been a genius, a man who saw the world in circuits and systems. He had also been profoundly eccentric. When he co-founded Sterling Vance with Julian's father, Robert Sterling, he had insisted on a peculiar clause in their partnership agreement. His 49% share of the company was his to pass on, but it could not be sold or diluted by the Sterling family for 25 years after his death. It was an ironclad, unchangeable stipulation. When he passed, Alara, his only living relative, inherited it all. But his will came with a final, unusual request, detailed in a handwritten letter she now knew by heart. My dearest Ellie, it began, I am leaving you more than money. I am leaving you a responsibility. SVI was built on innovation for the people, not just for profit, but a boardroom is an echo chamber. To lead, you must first learn to serve. To understand the value of a dollar, you must first earn one with calloused hands. Work for a year, live humbly, see the world not from the top of the tower, but from the street. Listen to the people who are invisible to men like Robert Sterling, and perhaps his son. When you understand what they need, what they fear, what they dream of, then and only then will you be ready to claim your seat at the table. Your name is Vance. It means something. Make them remember. She had honored his wish with the letter. She'd taken a job at a restaurant she knew the city's elite frequented, using a shortened version of her middle name as her last name on her application. For a year, she had been a fly on the wall, listening to the gossip of hedge fund managers, lawyers, and tech executives. She'd heard whispers about SVI, about Julian's ambition, about the immense risk of the Helios project. She knew more about the company's internal politics and public perception than anyone in the C-suite could imagine. She sat at her small desk and opened her laptop. Her portfolio screen glowed, displaying a number so large it seemed fictional. A 49% stake in Sterling Vance Innovations, valued at just over $4.3 billion. She was one of the wealthiest women in the country, and she spent her nights clearing breadcrumbs from tables. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus Thorne's private number. Thorne was the oldest member of the SVI board, her grandfather's closest friend and confidant. He was the only one who knew who she was. The agenda is set. Finch is planning to oppose Helios on fiscal grounds. Julian is counting on his charisma to push it through. They are not prepared for you. Are you ready, Alara? She typed back a simple reply. More than ready. See you at 9 a.m. She closed the laptop and picked up her grandfather's old leather-bound journal from the nightstand. She flipped to the last entry he ever wrote. They will underestimate you, Ellie. They will see a girl, not a leader. They will see my name, but they will not see my spirit in you until you show them. Do not show them anger. Show them vision. Do not demand respect. Command it. The heart of SVI is not in its stock price, it is in its purpose. Remind them of that purpose. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or self-pity. It was a tear of gratitude and resolve. The humiliation at the restaurant had faded, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. Tiffany Carmichael hadn't broken her. She had merely reminded her of the stakes. She wasn't just fighting for herself or her grandfather's memory. She was fighting for every person who had ever been dismissed, belittled, or told they weren't good enough. Tomorrow they wouldn't see Ilara, the clumsy waitress. They would see Alara Vance, and she would remind them all what that name truly meant. Julian Sterling lived in a penthouse that scraped the sky over Central Park. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling kingdom of lights he felt destined to rule. But that evening, the view offered no comfort. The confrontation at Aurelia's had left a sour taste in his mouth. He stood by the window, swirling a glass of Macallan 25, the amber liquid catching the city lights. Tiffany's words replayed in his mind. People like you just don't understand value. It was cruel, unnecessary, and embarrassingly public. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was an ambitious one, and he had long ago made the calculated decision that Tiffany, with her social connections and flawless public image, was an asset. Lately, however, the liability column was growing. "Can you believe the nerve of that waitress?" Tiffany said, emerging from the bedroom. She had changed into silk pajamas and was busy curating photos from their dinner for her Instagram story. "Just standing there, staring at me, she's probably jealous." "Or maybe she was just humiliated, Tiff," Julian said, his voice sharper than he intended. "You didn't have to go that far." Tiffany looked up, her expression a mask of manufactured innocence. "Darling, I was defending your honor. We're celebrating the biggest deal of your life," and she was careless. "It's about standards. It's the same in business, isn't it? You can't tolerate mediocrity. You have to cut it out." She glided over to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Don't worry about her. Think about tomorrow. After the board gives you the green light for Helios, we'll take the jet to St. Bart's for the weekend. Just us." He wanted to argue, to say that the waitress was a human being, not a balance sheet entry. But he was tired. The pressure of the Helios project was immense. It was his moonshot, a multi-billion-dollar gamble to create a network of solar-powered atmospheric water generators in arid regions. If it worked, it would solve water crises for millions and cement his legacy. If it failed, it would bankrupt the company his father and Arthur Vance had built from the ground up. He'd spent months preparing for this board meeting. He needed a unanimous vote to unlock the final stage of funding. Most of the board was on his side, eager for the massive returns Helios promised. But there were two holdouts. Gregory Finch, a ruthless corporate raider who had bought his way onto the board, saw the project as a financial overreach. And then there was Marcus Thorne, the company's conscience. Thorne had been with SVI from the beginning. He revered Arthur Vance like a saint and viewed Julian with a permanent air of suspicion, as if waiting for him to tarnish the Vance legacy of innovation with sterling commercialism. Thorne's vote was the one that mattered most, a seal of moral approval. "Everything is riding on this, Tiff," he murmured, leaning his head against hers. "It will be fine," she purred, scrolling through her phone. "You're Julian Sterling. You always get what you want." He wished he shared her certainty. His phone buzzed with an email from his assistant. The subject line read, "Final agenda for board meeting." He opened it. Everything was standard. Quarterly earnings, departmental reviews, and then the main event. Item 4, the Helios project, final approval. But then he saw a fifth item, added at the last minute. Item 5, introduction of and address by the majority shareholder representative for the Vance estate. Julian frowned. The Vance estate? That was impossible. The 49% stake had been in limbo for a year, managed by a faceless trust firm. Arthur Vance had no children, no living relatives that anyone knew of. The shares were a sleeping giant, their voting power dormant. He had tried for months to get information from the trust lawyers, but was met with a wall of polite, unbreachable silence. "What is it?" Tiffany asked, noticing his frown. "The lawyers for the Vance estate have appointed a representative. They're attending the meeting tomorrow." Tiffany shrugged, unimpressed. "So? It's probably just some stuffy old lawyer who'll vote whichever way the wind blows. It doesn't matter. It's 49%. Your 51% still rules the company. It's a formality, Julian. Stop stressing." She was right, of course. Legally, his majority stake was unassailable. But the sudden appearance of a Vance representative felt like a wild card, an unknown variable in an equation he had spent years meticulously balancing. It was a ghost at the feast. Arthur Vance had always been the one person his father, and now he, could never fully control. It seemed that even from beyond the grave, the old man had one last surprise in store. Julian drained his scotch. "I'm going to bed. It's a long day tomorrow." As he lay in the dark, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, he couldn't shake a strange sense of unease. He thought of the quiet waitress, Ilara. He remembered her eyes. There wasn't fear or anger in them, but a disconcerting stillness, a depth he couldn't fathom. It was the same look he had sometimes seen in old photographs of Arthur Vance, a look that suggested she saw more than she was letting on. He dismissed the thought as absurd, a symptom of pre-meeting anxiety. She was a waitress, nobody. By this time tomorrow, he wouldn't even remember her name. The morning broke over Manhattan in shades of gray and steel. At 7:30 a.m., Julian Sterling was already in his corner office on the 50th floor of the SVI Tower, a fortress of glass and ambition overlooking the city. His desk was a picture of organized chaos, financial projections, engineering schematics for Helios, and a leather-bound portfolio containing his speech to the board. He had rehearsed it a dozen times, every word chosen to inspire confidence and project unshakable authority. His assistant, a hyper-efficient young man named David, brought him his coffee. "Mr. Thorne and Mr. Finch have already arrived, sir. They're in the pre-briefing room." "Good," Julian nodded. "Any word from the Vance Estate's representative? Do we have a name yet?" "No, sir. Their legal counsel simply confirmed they will be here at 9 a.m. sharp. They requested a nameplate simply reading E. Vance." E. Vance. A nephew? A distant cousin Arthur had kept hidden away? The ambiguity was irritating. Julian hated surprises. He was adjusting his tie when his private line rang. It was Tiffany. "Darling, I'm on my way," she chirped. "I'm going to wait for you in the lobby cafe. I've already called a few press contacts. When the good news breaks, I want them there to get a shot of the happy power couple. We have to control the narrative." Julian pinched the bridge of his nose. "Tiff, I told you, this is a closed board meeting. It's not a photo op." "Oh, don't be silly. It's a celebration. I'll be discreet. Just text me when the vote is done, and I'll pop up to your office for the champagne toast. I've already had a case of Dom Perignon delivered. Break a leg." She hung up before he could protest further. He sighed, the added pressure of Tiffany's theatrical plans a heavy weight on his shoulders. He was managing a multi-billion-dollar corporate maneuver, and she was stage managing a press release. Meanwhile, across town, Elara stood before the full-length mirror in her small apartment. The navy blue suit fit perfectly. It was a statement of quiet elegance and substance, a stark contrast to the flashy labels favored by Tiffany and her ilk. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and her face was free of makeup except for a touch of mascara. Her only piece of jewelry was a simple, vintage watch on her wrist, her grandfather's watch. She wasn't nervous. The year of anonymity had been a crucible, burning away her youthful insecurities. She had listened to her city, to the people her grandfather had wanted to serve. She'd heard baristas worry about rent, students drowning in debt, and families struggling with medical bills. They were the real world, a world the men in the SVI boardroom saw only as data points on a spreadsheet. She looked at her reflection. She saw Vance in her eyes, the same sharp intelligence and unwavering resolve that stared back from her grandfather's photograph. Today, she was not just his heir, she was his messenger. She picked up a worn leather briefcase from her desk. It didn't contain financial reports or legal documents. Instead, it held her grandfather's journals, filled with his original sketches and notes for projects that were never realized. Projects designed to be affordable, sustainable, and revolutionary. He called them his legacy projects. The Helios project, in its current form, was a perversion of one of them, twisted from a humanitarian dream into a tool for corporate greed, with patents designed to price entire nations out of clean water. She took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and ink from the journals calming her. She walked out of her apartment, locking the door on her old life. The walk to the subway was the same as any other day. The city bustled around her, a chaotic symphony of sirens, chatter, and hurried footsteps. No one gave her a second glance. She was still invisible, but not for long. She arrived at the SVI Tower at 8:50 a.m. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and steel, designed to intimidate. A massive, polished SVI logo gleamed on the wall behind the security desk. She walked past the cafe where Tiffany was holding court, laughing with a friend and tapping impatiently on her phone. Tiffany's eyes flickered over Elara for a fraction of a second, registering nothing but a woman in a business suit, another anonymous corporate drone. There was not a hint of recognition. Elara approached the security desk. "I'm here for the board meeting. My name is Elara Vance." The guard checked his list. His eyes widened slightly as he found the name. "Of course, Miss Vance. Right this way. You have clearance for the 50th floor." He personally escorted her to a private elevator, the one reserved for the board and C-suite executives. As the doors slid shut, sealing her in the quiet, ascending car, she caught her reflection in the polished brass. The transformation was complete. The waitress was gone. In her place stood the key to the entire kingdom. The SVI boardroom was a theater of power. A long, monolithic mahogany table reflected the panoramic city view, like a dark, still lake. The air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and ambition. At one end of the table, Julian stood, projecting an aura of relaxed command as he chatted with two of his allied board members. Gregory Finch was at the other end, his face a thunderous mask of disapproval, flanked by his own supporters. The battle lines were clearly drawn. In the center of one side of the table, Marcus Thorne sat alone, a bastion of calm in the tense atmosphere. His gaze was fixed on the boardroom door. At precisely 9:20 a.m., the door opened. A junior executive led Elara in. "Mr. Sterling, members of the board, this is Ms. E. Vance, representing the Vance estate." A polite, curious murmur rippled through the room. Julian turned, a welcoming smile fixed on his face, ready to greet the stuffy old lawyer he had been expecting. The smile froze, then melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. His face went pale. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. It was her, the waitress, the woman from Aurelia's, the clumsy, invisible server his girlfriend had eviscerated just last night. She was standing here, in the heart of his empire, wearing a suit that looked more expensive than his own, her expression calm and unreadable. Gregory Finch leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in confusion. The other board members exchanged bewildered glances, trying to place her. Only Marcus Thorne smiled. He stood up, his chair scraping softly against the floor, and extended a hand. "Ilara," he said, his voice warm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "It is so good to finally see you here. Your grandfather would be immensely proud." Ilara shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Marcus. It's an honor to finally be here." The use of his first name, the familiar greeting, sent a second shockwave through the room. This wasn't just a legal representative. This was someone with a deep personal connection. Julian found his voice, though it was strained. There must be some mistake. You're," he couldn't bring himself to say it. "You're the waitress." "My name is Ilara Vance," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the authority of the room's largest shareholder. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze level and unwavering. "Arthur Vance was my grandfather. I am the sole heir to his estate and his 49% stake in this company." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system. Gregory Finch let out a low whistle. Julian looked like he had been physically struck, stumbling back a step. Ilara took her seat beside Marcus, placing her worn leather briefcase on the table with a soft thud. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, modern tablets and portfolios of the other members. She opened it and took out a pair of simple reading glasses, perching them on her nose. She looked every bit the serious, focused academic her grandfather had been. "I apologize for the unconventional nature of my introduction to the company's operations," she continued, her eyes scanning the faces around the table. "My grandfather's final wish was for me to understand SVI from all perspectives before I took my seat here. I believe I have now fulfilled that wish." Her gaze lingered on Julian for a moment longer, a subtle but unmistakable reference to their encounter the previous night. The color drained completely from his face as the full implication of her words hit him. She hadn't just been a waitress, she had been an observer, a judge, and he and Tiffany had failed her test spectacularly. Just then, the boardroom door burst open. Tiffany stood there, beaming, a magnum of champagne in her hand, followed by Julian's assistant, who was trying desperately to stop her. "Surprise!" she sang out, her voice echoing in the tomb-like silence. "I know the vote hasn't happened yet, but I couldn't wait to get the celebration started." She stopped dead. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the shocked faces, the funereal atmosphere, and Julian's ashen expression. And then her gaze fell on Ilara. Her perfectly constructed smile cracked. Confusion warred with disbelief on her face. What are you doing here? Security!" "That's quite enough, Ms. Carmichael," Marcus Thorne said, his voice like ice. "This is a private meeting of the board of directors, of which Ms. Vance is now a key member." Tiffany stared, her mouth agape, looking from Ilara to Julian and back again. "Julian, what is he talking about? Why is the help sitting at your table?" The word help hung in the air, a final, damning indictment. Ilara didn't flinch. She simply looked at Tiffany, her expression not of anger, but of something closer to pity. "Ms. Carmichael," she said, her voice calm and measured, "my grandfather once told me that you can judge a person's character by how they treat those they believe can do nothing for them. Thank you for showing me yours so clearly last night." She then turned her attention to Julian, the dismissal so complete it was as if Tiffany had ceased to exist. "Mr. Sterling, shall we begin? I believe the first item on the agenda is the Helios project. I have some notes." The bottle of champagne slipped from Tiffany's numb fingers, crashing to the floor and shattering. The explosion of foam and glass, the only sound in the ruined silence of Julian Sterling's perfect world. The sound of the shattering bottle finally broke the spell. Julian's assistant, David, rushed forward, frantically trying to clean up the mess of glass and champagne that was now pooling on the expensive carpet. Tiffany stood frozen amidst the wreckage, her face a grotesque collage of confusion, horror, and dawning humiliation. "Get her out of here," Julian managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. He couldn't look at Ilara. He couldn't look at anyone. He felt as if the floor had dissolved beneath him. Two security guards materialized and gently but firmly escorted the still speechless Tiffany from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving an even more profound silence in its wake. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Julian, the new power at the table, and the mess on the floor. The symbolism was lost on no one. Ilara watched the scene with an unnerving placidity. Once the door was closed, she folded her hands on the table. "Now," she said, as if there had been no interruption. "The Helios Project. I've reviewed the prospectus. It's ambitious. My grandfather would have admired the scale." Julian, desperate to reclaim some semblance of control, cleared his throat. "Yes, it's the future of this company, a legacy project that will redefine green energy." "A legacy project," Ilara repeated softly. She opened her grandfather's journal. "It's interesting you use that term, because I have his original designs for a very similar project right here." She turned the journal around for the board to see. Detailed, hand-drawn schematics of atmospheric water generators, dated 10 years prior. He called it the Oasis Initiative. She looked up, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. His vision was to create open-source, low-cost units for developing nations, to give water freely. "Your proposal, Mr. Sterling, takes his humanitarian concept, encumbers it with a dozen proprietary patents, and turns it into a subscription model that the very people who need it most could never afford. You've turned a gift into a weapon of market dominance." Gregory Finch, who had been watching the drama with the keen eye of a predator, let a slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He had found his opening. "This is a fascinating development," he drawled. "It appears the very foundation of the project is questionable, ethically and perhaps legally." "That's not true," Julian shot back, his voice rising in panic. "We modernized the design. We made it viable, profitable." "Profitable for whom, Julian?" Ilara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "For our shareholders, or for the world my grandfather wanted to help. SVI's motto, which he wrote himself, is innovation for humanity. Does the Helios Project, in its current form, honor that? Or does it merely serve the sterling legacy of profit above all else?" The direct hit landed with brutal force. She had not only challenged his project, but the very philosophy of his leadership. She was framing this as a battle for the company's soul, Vance versus Sterling. Marcus Thorne seized the moment. "Ilara raises a valid and crucial point. Arthur always believed that our greatest innovations should also be our greatest contributions. I must confess, I have had my own reservations about the aggressive monetization strategy of Helios." One by one, the other board members, who minutes ago had been ready to rubber stamp Julian's proposal, began to waver. They saw the shift in power. They saw Finch's opportunistic grin and Thorne's moral conviction. Most importantly, they saw the woman who controlled 49% of the company, armed not with spreadsheets but with the founder's own words. Julian was unraveling. This meeting was supposed to be his coronation. Instead, it was an inquisition. This is a hijack," he stammered. "You've been planning this." "I have been preparing," Ilara corrected him gently. "My grandfather taught me to do my homework. And my homework suggests that the Helios Project is not only ethically dubious, but financially reckless. The projections are based on government contracts that are not yet secured and a technology that is not yet stable at scale. You are asking this board to bet the entire company on a project that is fundamentally flawed in both its purpose and its execution." She closed the journal. "Therefore, I cannot in good conscience allow the Vance Estates shares to be used to approve this project as it stands. I vote no." Her declaration hung in the air, a death sentence. While she didn't have a controlling stake, her 49% was a monolithic block. With Marcus Thorne and likely Gregory Finch now siding with her for their own reasons, Julian's dream was dead on arrival. His majority was an illusion. The board's confidence was shattered. He sank into his chair, defeated. The energy, the charisma, the unshakable confidence. It all drained out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He had been so sure of his victory, so dismissive of the past, that he never saw the future walking toward him in a waitress's uniform. Ilara let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of the moment to settle on everyone. This was not about revenge on Tiffany or humiliating Julian. This was about a fundamental course correction. "However," she said, her tone shifting from opposition to proposition, "I am not proposing we abandon the idea. I am proposing we fix it. Her eyes met Julian's across the long table. The engineering is brilliant, Julian. Your team has done remarkable work, but the vision is lost. I move that we table the vote on Helios indefinitely. In its place, I propose the formation of a new strategic committee, co-chaired by myself and Mr. Sterling, to redevelop the project in line with my grandfather's original vision, the Oasis Initiative. We will find a way to make it both sustainable for the company and accessible to the world. It was a masterstroke. She hadn't just torpedoed his plan, she had offered a lifeline. She wasn't ousting him. She was forcing him into a partnership. She was making him accountable to her vision, to her grandfather's legacy. It was a move of incredible strategic intelligence, saving the company from a civil war while asserting her authority completely. Julian stared at her, a complex storm of emotions in his eyes. Humiliation, anger, but also a dawning, grudging respect. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn by the woman he had overlooked, the woman his girlfriend had tried to crush. He had no choice. To refuse would be to admit defeat and likely face a vote of no confidence. To accept was to swallow his pride and submit to her leadership. Slowly, deliberately, he nodded. I accept the proposal. The tension in the room broke. Marcus Thorne beamed. Gregory Finch looked momentarily disappointed that there would be no corporate bloodbath, but intrigued by the new power dynamic. Ilara Vance had not just taken her seat at the table, she had rebuilt the table itself. The weeks that followed were a seismic shift for Sterling Vance Innovations. The story of the boardroom showdown became the stuff of corporate legend, whispered in hallways and over coffee. Tiffany Carmichael vanished from the social scene, her Instagram account suddenly dormant, her name a cautionary tale of hubris. Ilara Vance, however, became a constant, quiet presence on the 50th floor. She claimed a modest office down the hall from Julian's, not the grand corner suite her grandfather had once occupied. She spent her days not issuing commands but asking questions. She met with engineers, programmers, and marketing teams. She ate in the employee cafeteria, listening to the conversations, just as she had at Aurelia's. She was learning her company from the inside out. The Oasis Initiative Committee meetings were exercises in strained diplomacy. Julian, initially sullen and resentful, found himself disarmed by Ilara's approach. He came prepared for a fight, armed with data and counter-arguments, but she rarely argued. Instead, she would listen intently to his points, and then counter with a simple, disarming question. But how does this help the person who has no water? Or, what if we measured success not in profit margin, but in lives changed? She wasn't emotional or naive. Her questions were incisive, forcing him to re-examine the core assumptions of his business model. She had brought her grandfather's journals to every meeting, using his original principles as their constitution. Slowly, grudgingly, Julian began to see the brilliance in the old man's vision, a hybrid model where corporate and government contracts in wealthy nations would subsidize the cost of deploying units in developing regions, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem of profit and philanthropy. It was more complex, less immediately profitable, but it was more resilient, more meaningful, and ultimately more innovative. One late evening, they were the last two left in the boardroom, surrounded by whiteboards covered in new schematics and financial models. I still don't understand, Julian said abruptly, breaking a long silence. Why the waitress job? Why the charade for a whole year? Ilara looked up from a page of her grandfather's notes. He knew that people at this level, in rooms like this, are insulated from reality. He wanted me to understand the weight of our decisions, to know what it feels like to be invisible, so I would never treat others that way. To be honest, she added with a small wry smile, I thought his methods were a bit dramatic until that night at the restaurant. Julian flinched, the memory still raw. I am sorry, Ilara, for what she said, for what I didn't say. There's no excuse. It was the first genuine apology he had offered. The world is full of Tiffany's, Julian, she replied softly. The real test is whether we choose to be one of them, or whether we choose to see the people they look past. It was in that moment that a subtle shift occurred, the beginning of a fragile truce turning into an unlikely partnership. Julian started to see Ilara not as a rival or the ghost of his father's partner, but as a brilliant strategist in her own right. He brought the business acumen, she brought the vision. Together, they were building something stronger than he could have ever built alone. The real twist, however, came a month later. While conducting a deep audit for the new Oasis initiative, Ilara's keen eye, honed by a year of observing details, noticed a series of unusual fund transfers and data breaches deep within the SVI servers. They were small, almost untraceable, disguised as payments to shell corporations. She brought her findings to Julian. Working together through the night, they followed the digital trail. What they found chilled them to the bone. The data breaches were targeted, siphoning off the most sensitive R&D from the original Helios project. The trail led them not outside the company, but to another member of the board, Gregory Finch. Finch hadn't been opposing Helios on principle. He had been stalling. His plan was to devalue the project, drive down SVI's stock price, and then use the stolen R&D to launch a competing, faster-to-market version with a rival company he was secretly funding. He had seen Julian's arrogance and the project's ethical flaws as the perfect cover for his corporate espionage. He had planned to ruin Julian and buy the remnants of SVI for pennies on the dollar. Ilara's dramatic arrival and her subsequent pivot to the Oasis initiative had been an unforeseen complication, but Finch had continued his scheme, underestimating her just as Julian had. The next board meeting was very different from the last. There was no theatrics, no shouting. With cold, undeniable evidence, Ilara and Julian laid out Gregory Finch's treachery. He was removed from the board and met by federal agents in the lobby. As the meeting concluded, Julian walked over to Ilara. "You saved the company," he said, his voice filled with a respect that was now deep and genuine. "Your grandfather told you to understand the company from the street. You ended up seeing things that none of us in the tower could." Ilara looked out the window at the sprawling city below. "He didn't just leave me stock, Julian. He left me a perspective. And it turns out that's where the real value is." The new SVI was being built on a different foundation. It was no longer just Sterling Vance in name, but in spirit, a synthesis of bold commerce and profound purpose. Ilara Vance had come to the boardroom not to tear down an empire, but to remind it of its soul. And in doing so, she had not only saved the company from its enemies, but also from itself. The waitress who had been told she was worthless was now undeniably the most valuable asset they had. 6 months after the unmasking of Gregory Finch, the SVI tower felt like a different building. The tense, competitive atmosphere had been replaced by a palpable buzz of innovation. The name on everyone's lips was the Oasis Initiative. The project, co-led by Ilara and Julian, had moved with astonishing speed. The first field test units, deployed in a drought-stricken region of East Africa, were already operational and exceeding all expectations. The boardroom, once a battlefield, was now a collaborative hub. One afternoon, Julian and Ilara stood side by side, watching a live feed on the main screen. It showed children from a small village laughing and splashing their faces in a stream of clean, cool water pouring from a sleek solar-powered SVI generator. An elderly village chief was speaking to a field reporter, his voice thick with emotion. "For us, this is not technology," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "It is life. It is a miracle." Julian felt a profound sense of satisfaction that was deeper and more resonant than any stock market surge he had ever engineered. He glanced at Ilara, who was watching the screen with a quiet, intense smile. Their partnership had evolved into a seamless fusion of two minds. He brought the operational ferocity and corporate strategy. She brought the ethical compass and the visionary soul. They worked late, fueled by coffee and a shared driving purpose. The formal Mr. Sterling and Miss Vance had long been replaced by an easy Julian and Ilara. This new SVI, humanitarian, innovative, and more profitable than ever due to the immense positive press and new government partnerships, had not gone unnoticed. Julian's public image had been transformed from a ruthless corporate scion to a thoughtful, visionary leader. And it was this transformation that drew the ghost of his past back to his doorstep. Tiffany Carmichael had watched Julian's star rise again, this time with a halo of philanthropy around it. She saw the magazine covers, the interviews praising his new direction. In her mind, she had not been wrong, merely premature. She saw this new success as an even grander stage and was convinced Julian must be lonely at the top. After a 6-month self-imposed exile, she decided it was time to reclaim her position. She chose her moment carefully, arriving at the SVI Tower late one afternoon, dressed in a stunningly understated but ferociously expensive white suit. She looked like the embodiment of class and forgiveness. She was heading towards the private elevator when the doors opened, and Julian and Alara emerged, laughing over a shared joke as they put on their coats. Tiffany froze for a second, then composed herself into a mask of warm surprise. "Julian, darling." Julian stopped. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by a calm, neutral politeness. Alara stood quietly by his side, her presence a silent statement. "Tiffany," he said, his tone even, "I hope you're well." "I'm wonderful," she lied, her eyes flicking dismissively over Alara before returning to Julian. "I've been watching everything you're doing. It's incredible. Truly, I always knew you had it in you. We should celebrate, just like old times. We were always such a great team." Her words hung in the air, a desperate attempt to rewrite history. Julian looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her not with lingering anger or resentment, but with a profound and sorrowful clarity. He saw a woman trapped in a world of surfaces, of appearances, and perceived value. A world he had almost been trapped in himself. "I'm glad you think so, Tiffany," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But my team is right here." He gestured subtly to Alara. "We're actually on our way to a working dinner to plan phase 2 of the initiative." The finality in his tone was unmistakable. He was not rejecting her with malice, but simply stating a fact. His world had moved on, and its axis was now a purpose she could never comprehend. Tiffany's smile faltered, her poise cracking for a moment as she saw the unbreachable partnership between the two of them. She saw that she was not just replaced, but had become irrelevant. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her retreat a quiet admission of a defeat far greater than the one in the boardroom. As they stepped out into the crisp evening air, Julian let out a long breath. "I think," he said, looking at Alara, "that's the first time I've ever felt pity for her." "Because you're not the man you were 6 months ago," Alara replied, her gaze meeting his. There was a warmth in her eyes that went beyond their professional respect. "No," Julian agreed, a small smile touching his lips. "Thanks to you," he paused. "My father and your grandfather built this company to be a legacy. For a long time, I thought that meant money and power. I see now that's just the weight of it. You showed me that a legacy isn't what you own. It's what you build for others." Together, they walked into the bustling New York City night, leaving the ghosts of the past behind, their conversation turning back to schematics, logistics, and the millions of lives they were about to change. They were no longer just the Sterling and the Vance of the company name. They were its heart and its mind, united in building a future far brighter than either could have ever imagined alone. And so, Alara Vance's journey comes full circle. It wasn't about the triumphant moment she revealed her identity, but about everything that came after. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about humiliating those who wrong us, but about having the vision and integrity to build something better from the ashes of conflict. Alara didn't just punish Julian, she challenged him to become a better leader. She didn't just expose an enemy, she forged an alliance that saved the company. This story teaches us that dignity, intelligence, and power can be found in the most unexpected places. It's a call to look beyond the uniform, the job title, or the social status, and to recognize the inherent worth in everyone we meet. You never know if the person you dismiss today is the one you'll be answering to tomorrow. If this story of hidden strength and karmic justice resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think twice. What did you think of Alara's strategy? Let me know in the comments below.